Hey guys, today I have quite a special video because I'm trying out a new vehicle building game called Plasma. Now this is actually from some of the developers of Polybridge, and I have a few things I want to build later, but I actually wanted to start by going through the tutorial and showing you some of the features of the game. Now walking in, the first main demo seemed to be this RC car, and what I really like about it is this joystick. The way you could just move around the car with this was really interesting, and I haven't really seen that control scheme before. Now the next demo here is supposed to show you how to unlock objects, and you can see I'm able to simulate this guy, but what I really realized that you can just throw things in this game, and it's actually kind of funny to do. Now in this next demo though, this is when I saw thrusters, and I got pretty excited by this. Now you can see the rocket landed on this car over here, and I actually wanted to mess with that for a little bit. Now I'm guessing this is supposed to be the building demo, and you can see here I put the tire right on the car, and after I did that, I wanted to try driving it around, and this was the first time I actually docked into something, and I really liked the way it worked. Basically, as soon as you get in, it sort of works like Trailmakers, where you just control everything with your keyboard, and honestly, it was a pretty seamless experience to get in here, and I thought it was pretty fun to drive. But of course, we won't be needing this anymore, and the next thing I wanted to do was try going into this main building. Now, I think this is supposed to be the programming tutorial, and you'll see here when I hit Q, it opens up the sketch. Now, this works really similarly to main assembly, if you've ever seen that game. Basically, you have a bunch of blocks, and you have to connect them together with lines, and you can see here, I connected the output of the switch to the input of the door, and by doing that, once I press the switch, it opens up the door. Now, in here, I saw this Pong Game. I thought this was something that the devs probably made, and then are just having projected onto the screen, and it was pretty fun to mess with, but I wanted to try opening up the sketch and seeing what was inside. That's when I realized that not only is this very complicated, it's also the entire game. There seems to be nothing that you couldn't just do as a user to make this exact game, and that sort of customization on a display is really interesting. Now, I headed out of this main room, and there's a few other tutorials I checked out, but really, I just wanted to get straight into the building, and if you guys want to check out the rest of this tutorial, the demo for this game is going to be releasing on October 3rd, so make sure to join their Discord server, which I have linked in the description, to get notified on exactly when that happens. Now, starting out with building here, I just started out by putting down a cube like this, and on that, I wanted to put down a bunch of thrusters. My goal here was to make the most simple rocket car I possibly could, and hopefully make something that actually moves. So to put down the first thruster here, I put it in the middle of the block and put one next to it, but I realized that two thrusters it isn't enough. We're going to need as much power as we can get here, so I decided to move these down and squeeze in two more thrusters. And after that, I started adding on some more cubes to the front here, and I just wanted to extend out the body and hopefully keep this from just flipping over right away. And once I got 3 of those on there, next thing I wanted to do was add on some motors. I didn't want to power these at all, I just needed something to act as a bearing, and I was hoping these would get the job done. So after getting those on the corners, next thing I did was get the wheel. And something interesting is that the wheel is actually a sphere. I would like to maybe see some regular wheels in addition to this one, but this one's still a lot of fun, so figured I might as well put that on there for now. Next thing I did was get a controller, and I put it down. I actually started by putting down the motors. Now what I wanted to do is set their friction to 0%, and I was hoping that was going to mean that they're able to just freely move around. So after I configured all 4 of those, I added in the thruster blocks here, and I added on a button to the main machine. This button I'm going to link to all of the thrusters, and that should get me going. Now I just want to get the programming really simple here, so I started out by putting down the button, and then I set it up so that if I press the button, it turns on the thruster. That made sense to me, and once I get that all hooked up here, I set the thrusters to 100% power, because why not? And trying it out, it was interesting. So looking more at it, I tried to hit the button to stop it, but it wasn't stopping. And that's when I realized that I not only need to tell the thrusters to turn on when I push the button, I also need to tell them to turn off when I release the button. So after configuring that here, it did seem to be behaving right, and you can see now I froze the machine, and I dragged it back over to the start. Once I got that back down there, I unfroze it, sat on it, and I tried to launch it away. And you can see here, I'm getting up to a pretty good speed. Actually, a little bit too good of a speed. And apparently I got too far out of the world and then got teleported back. Now I ended up finding my machine again, and once I did that, got right back on it, and I launched myself right into the sign. And that seemed to be the end of that, because then it just got stuck in the sign, and nothing really wanted to work. Now I was thinking of what I wanted to build next, and I started messing around with the screen for a bit, but then I got the idea of making a gimbal jet. Now I knew this gimbal jet was going to be a lot more complicated, so I wanted to start out with these hexagonal panels and be a little more careful with how I made the body. So you can see I'm stacking a few of these on here, and after I did that, I also started filling in the sides. Now you can see here, I built up something reasonably substantial, and on that, I wanted to start putting down a servo. Now the plan is to have 2 servos rotate to always point a thruster straight at the ground, and that'll mean that I'm only producing thrusts directly up. And with that on there, next thing I did is put on a thruster. Now I liked the way that looked, and I wanted to put a gyroscope right on that. Now the gyroscope is going to be able to output what angle I'm at, and I can use that data to move the servos to get them to face straight down. Now I also did add in that other servo, and after that, you can see here, I'm connecting the pitch output of the gyroscope right into the target rotation of the first servo. And already, it was sort of working. You can see here as I angled the entire body, the servo also turned, but instead of turning back so the bottom was facing down, it actually rotated and doubled the angle that it was at. Now to fix that, what I'm going to need to do is multiply that angle by -1, and I can add in a math expression to do this. That should have solved my problem, but it actually wasn't doing anything anymore, and that's when I realized that you need to add in this ticker box, and what that does just makes it automatically update. So finally here, as I dropped it on the ground, you can see the servo is mostly pointing straight down. So with that looking good, what I did here is add in a tube, and on that, I put down that other servo. Now with that done, put back down the thruster, and I was ready to keep developing this, but I did run into a small problem. It became nighttime, and it's kind of hard to show what's going on at night. Fortunately here, there's an environmental controller, and if I connect the ticker to this, I can just set it to keep setting the time to 12 o'clock, and by doing that, it should permanently be nice and bright out. Now the design was mostly working at the moment. Sometimes it would start doing this, but I figured once I added in the other gyroscope control, it should get better. And already, you'll notice something interesting. The thruster is always pointed directly back. That's not exactly what I want. It's not down, but it's pretty close to working. And if I add in a math expression here and tell it to subtract 90 degrees, you can see now as I move it around, it's always pointing directly down, and that should work exactly as I want it to. Now, if that one thruster working is a proof of concept, I wanted to add in one on the other side as well, just to balance out the thrust, and you can see here, works just the same way, and honestly, I was pretty happy with that. So I copied this over again, and I put this on the back side of the machine. And with all that on there, the next thing I wanted to do was figure out a way to have this just hover in place. As it is, if I turn on the thrusters, it just ends up flying into the air, and it really never stops. My first idea was to add in an accelerometer, and I was hoping to use the output of that to balance the position in the sky. And once I hooked it into a number comparator here, I set all the thrusters to 20% power, and I wanted to give it a test. Now, it kind of just went straight into the air, and then came right back down. And after a bunch more testing, part of the problem I realized is that the main center of the machine can still rotate side to side freely, which really throws off the accelerometer. So to fix that here, I added in 2 more thrusters, and you'll notice as I pull down the machine, it naturally rotates back up into place, and that corrective movement should solve all my problems. I decided to grab this and throw it in the air to test it though, and you'll notice that it starts oscillating around a lot. That's not good, and in order to solve that, what I wanted to do is add on some rods. These have a lot of mass, so it's a lot harder for the thrusters to move them side to side, and finally as I throw it in the air here, it mostly managed to fix the problem. Now I also decided to add in a distance sensor to help with the height control. The problem with the distance sensor though, is that the thrusters don't really care about how fast it's going, they only care about the position, so they end up overshooting all the time, and that causes this oscillation. In fact, I actually let this run here for quite a while, and I was curious to see if it would ever stop, but it never did. It just kept oscillating this exact same way, and while technically this is somewhat working, it's a really bad height control, and I wanted to fix it up a little bit. And in order to do that, I actually put in the accelerometer data again, and this helps a little bit to limit the maximum acceleration of the device. Now you can see here, taking off the ground, it goes up pretty well, and while it does come back down, it does miss the ground, which means that it is dampening at least a little bit. And I tried this near the ground as well, and you can see here, while it does still bounce, again, it's really a limited bounce, and it doesn't seem to be too bad. Even running into it here, it mostly seemed to correct itself, and overall, it seemed to be okay. So the buoyancy system finally figured out, what I wanted to do next was add on the joystick. Now the way this is gonna work is that as I move the joystick around, it creates a small input, and that's gonna mess around with the gimbal angles, and instead of pointing straight down, it's gonna point slightly back or forward. You see it can start to get off the ground here, and it is a little bit finicky, but once I got it working, it actually did seem to mess around with the angle pretty well. For some reason though, whenever I wanted to go forward, it would push me into the ground. Whenever I wanted to go back, it would actually push me further up. Not sure if that was a weight distribution problem, but at least for now, it was a pretty good start, and I assumed I could just figure out the rest of that later. Now you can also see the system on the ground here, and as I move around the servos, it slightly moves around those angles. Now I did run into a tree, but that's okay. And while I was at it, I also added in some side-to-side control here. You can see now the jet's able to move around on every axis, and when I try moving in the side-to-side control, I actually do start drifting to the left here. Now the last main control I wanted to add on here was rotation. To do that, I added on a slider here, and I used more thrusters. These thrusters are going to slightly push me side to side, and I should be able to use the position of the slider to get this to work. Then you can see here, I'm actually able to move the slider over, and it starts to rotate me in the other direction. Now, I was starting to think at this point, it probably would have been a good idea to start mapping my controls to my keyboard, but that was a lot of work to figure out. I actually kind of like the look of this right now with everything right on the machine. With the controls looking good though, I wanted to start working on the cosmetics next, and to do that, I actually want to start by making larger legs. I realized that since the machine was was actually pretty stable. I could probably deal with these, and you can see now I'm resizing a tube and getting it to be pretty long. Once I found a length here that I liked, I put down the thruster on the bottom of it, and after that, I copied it over to all of the other legs. I did realize a small problem though. It looks really stupid now, and the problem is that the legs are way too close together. So what I wanted to do is actually make them even wider and get a much better stance. So you can see here, I copied over a rod from the back of the machine, and after I put that on the servo here, I put the leg right back on that, and with that done, you can see the one leg is a lot wider now. And finishing it all up here, it actually looks even dumber, but at the very least, it should be a lot more stable. So trying out a flight here, I was actually able to get off the ground pretty easily now, but there was a small oscillation problem that I wasn't quite ready for. I accidentally dismounted the machine before I got rid of the thruster power, and that caused some interesting problems here. So I just teased out that issue, and after that, I finally got rid of my slider and replaced it with a joystick for the left and right controls. After some more interesting scenarios, I tried to give it a final test here and see how it would do. Now starting out here, getting off the ground was working pretty well. And you'll also notice there's a switch over on my left now. I added in some logic so that if the switch is on, my auto height control is also on, but if I turn it off, the slider just acts as raw thruster power. So if I need to get out of somewhere quickly, I can just turn that on, and it saves me a little bit of time. Now after getting the height adjusted just where I wanted it, I started moving myself around with the joystick, and with that done, I started flying around a little bit. I realized that gentle movements are definitely the best way to go here, and if I try to force anything quickly, it kind of just breaks immediately. At the very least though, you can see I'm starting to drift forward here, and overall, things are going pretty well. I'm even able to flip completely around here and start to go forward again, canceling out my speed and then building it back forward. Now, one thing I really like too is you can see the legs moving around as I move the joystick. I just think that looks really interesting, and especially when it goes side to side, you can really see them kick up on the sides. Near this mountain, I tried it here, and I was really starting to get that leg to come up here, and I was getting some pretty good speed to the side. After that, I actually started to turn here and then pull the joystick back, and that completely canceled out my speed, and you can see here, I'm beginning to just hover again. And with that looking good, I decided just to land here, and overall, pretty good flight. I did see one other interesting target here though, and it was one of these other machines I had spawned in before that was just oscillating up and down. I wanted to try to run into it and see if I could pilot it to do that. So I tried getting into position here, and once I was roughly where I wanted to be, I started using the joystick to cancel out my side movement. Overall, this was really good, and being able to just move laterally is pretty powerful considering that every time I turn, I slowly start to drift in another direction. Now I also slowly started to make progress going forward, and I was trying to be pretty careful with my height control as well, because once I got over this mountain, I started to gain height pretty quickly. So I turned around here, I pulled back down my throttle, and after that, you can see myself turning around, I'm starting to push forward again. Now, I wasn't sure if I was gonna hit it, but fortunately it came up at just the right time, and it hit me. I'm gonna count that as good enough, and overall, I think that thing is pretty maneuverable. Now, also for some final shots here, you can see me move this around with my mouse, and you can see all the legs move at once. There is no true third person in this, so I can't be like docked on it while it does it, but with some amount of difficulty, I am able to show you this while I'm sort of just hovering above the ground. So if you want to play this game, make sure to join their Discord server. They'll be releasing the demo on October 3rd, and also make sure to join my Discord server because I gotta chill it somehow. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more of this game. If you have any other questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below, and otherwise, till next time.